Electricity in and of itself is supposed to be a good that is accessible to all.
We need electricity, but we can't afford electricity.
Fuel costs and taxes together constitute 47% of your electricity bill.
We are paying more in taxes and charges for getting electricity tokens than the actual serving product.
Nobody wants to explain to the consumer, yet it is the consumer who is trying to pay for that money.
Sometimes it's better to have expensive power than no power.
This is a breakdown of your electricity bill. Electricity has always been a complex commodity to consumers in Kenya. Most consumers deem the cost unreasonably high or complicated. When we asked Kenya Power about this is what they had to say.
I wouldn't say that the cost of power is very high. I would say that where we are, the cost of power is reflective of the amount of investment that has been put to ensure that that level of quality in this part of the world is achieved.
Before 2009, all Kenyans used the post-paid meter. This meant that someone came to your home, read your meter, and a bill would arrive at the end of the month. Most payments were made at Kenya Power offices countrywide. But in 2013, the prepaid meter was introduced. With this meter, the users pay for the electricity in advance of using, therefore eliminating the need for meter reading. These mobile-like devices allowed Kenyans to purchase any quantity of electricity using third-party vendors such as M-Pesa and Airtel Money, what many now refer to as tokens.
Nafanya kazi ya welding na pia engineering yoyote inahusiana na moto hadi ya gas mi uchoma nazo. Stima kwa duka yangu bill ndio imekuwa sometime inatupiga challenge. Juu nakuta end month ukitishwa bill karibu ya 3,000 ama 4 na hujakuwa umework. Na unaona kama ni kwa nyumba hiyo token ukieka ya dhao unakuta umetumia karibu miezi 4. Na kwa nyumba unaona vitu unatumia ni electrical mzito, fridge, yani vitu pia mzito. Hizi mashini saa hizi haiwaki na moto sana, imekuwa kama transformer inavuta moto kidogo na release mingi. But wewe bill ukiletewa ya Kenya Power, unashindwa rada.
Historia ya stima imekuwa hard kidogo. Kilipa token na kuji vile ilikuwa kitambo. Tuseme 100 hivi unapata hizo 6 units. But saa hizi ni 4.
The bill doesn't show up with one figure on it detailing your monthly consumption. It shows up in the form of a text message containing 8 costs. And most consumers get lost in the jargon.
Hata huwa sielewi. Client akikuja, sometimes anakuambia acha tu niende nioshe nywele nyumbani kwa sababu umeongeza bei. Alafu unajua token sasa hapa tuchemshe maji, blow dry. Haezi linganisha kama ile ya nyumbani, anaona nikaa unamuongezea mingi.
Amount nililipa 200, token amount ni 75 bob. Kwa 200 token amount ni 75 VAT 23.29. Fuel energy 69.94. Fuel energy. Na unaona hii token nimebuy through M-Pesa. Hakuna mahali ati wameniletea mimi na gari yao wamekuja kusoma bill. Hii Forex charge 20.35. Hiyo hata sijui ni nini. Hiyo sijui maana yake. EPRA charge hiyo ni 0.29. WRA charge 0.11. Hii ingine ni RP charge. Hii ni 3.78. Inflation adjustment 6.58. Yani iko na vitu mingi zingine hata hazieleweki yani.
What is a token amount and what are forex adjustment costs? This meant that transparency was achieved, but also more inconsistencies were now apparent, opening the doors to scrutiny.
There are one using tokens, and then also for the people who pay post, they're overbilling them.
The first of the 8 components is the token amount or energy charge. This is the cost of electricity that is bought in units or kilowatt hours. This amount goes to Kenya Power for supplying the electricity you use in your household. It's also noteworthy that the cost of 1 unit varies according to your average monthly consumption.
You realize there are 2 kinds of tariffs for domestic. There is one if you consume more than 100 kilowatt hours, you will be charged at 25 shillings. There is another one, if you are consuming less, you will be charged at around 19 shillings. So if you take 1,000 and divide for both, you realize they will give you different. But what informs on which tariff you need to be? It is basically they come and take your 3 months consumption. If you have exceeded 100 kilowatt hours and you had been consuming less, but now you have consumed for the last 3 months more than 100, then you are taken to the more expensive tariff. If you are on the more expensive tariff and then you have consumed less in the consecutive 3 months, then you will be taken to the lower one.
Presently, domestic lifeline consumers purchased 1 unit for 7 shillings and 70 cents, whereas domestic ordinary consumers paid 12 shillings and 60 cents for the same quantity. Secondly, the fuel energy charge. This is the amount that is paid for the fuel used by thermal generators. To a domestic lifeline consumer, fuel charges alone take up 35% of the cost. This amount goes to the independent power producers or IPPs.
That fuel cost is supposed to be the amount of fuel that was used to generate power using thermals. Now, it is supposed to be varying because if we had more thermals this month, then the cost should be higher. When we have less this month, then it should be lower. The challenge is that that is not the trend. We sometimes have a standard or a flat rate.
When you go back to the generation of electricity, then you realize that there are all these independent power producers who produce electricity and sell it on. It's transmitted and they sell it on. And it is Kenya Power that is then responsible for paying these independent power producers. And these independent power producers work on the basis of power purchase agreements. And these power purchase agreements are the agreements that will allow them then to be generating and selling electricity at a particular price for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And that is where the corruption starts.
So I have already instructed that we complete those transmission lines within the next 10 months so that we make sure that we bring down the cost of energy, because we will retire some of the thermal power that is causing this huge cost.
Thirdly, the Forex adjustment costs. These are currency costs incurred by Kenya Power anywhere along the value chain. For instance, Kenya Power does all payments to IPPs in dollars or euros, but consumers incur all the losses during this conversion. And now with the shilling weakening, these prices are steadily rising. In other words, the more the shilling depreciates, the higher these costs. The fuel cost and Forex adjustment costs account for 42% of your bill if you are a domestic lifeline consumer and 32% of your bill if you are a domestic ordinary consumer. The fourth component is the inflation adjustment costs. It varies according to international and domestic inflation on the cost of supply. It's also adjusted every 6 months from the 1st of January every year.
Inflation, I think we may not have a lot of questions to ask. In any case, it ranges between 0.3 to 0.7, which is not a challenge. But still, we don't have anybody who checks, because you know Wanjiko need to be told, this inflation is this amount because of this calculation. Then you agree, because even a cent on that component can be a lot of money when you're talking about Kenya Power collects about 20 billion or 15 billion per month.
The elephant in the room, however, is the 16% VAT on electricity. VAT is imposed on the energy cost and fuel cost. It currently takes up 12% of the bill for all consumers. Experts have described it as an unhealthy tax policy, one that's harmful to the growth of the economy.
Electricity in and of itself is supposed to be a good that is accessible to all. But as you look at it, for instance, just you look at your token, what has happened is that over time again, government has used fuel products as a basis, because again they are consumed en masse, as a basis for collecting of tax. And therefore you find that whereas there might not be a tax, for instance, there's no excise duty, but you have VAT, for instance, there's VAT on electricity.
Kenya Power also has the added curse on consumers by adding and burdening the consumer with levies. So if you look at your electricity bill, you have water, you have a Forex, you have fuel charge, and this is really punitive. This is the highest. If you look at your bill and the breakdown, look at the fuel cost charge. Then you have rural electrification for the last mile projects, and then you have VAT on top of all of that. So by the time you're buying tokens, for example, worth 5,000 shillings, maybe 2,800 of that will have disappeared into other levies.
It's a very captive tax. Captive in the sense that it's not a tax you can opt out. Payee, you can opt out by either using whatever means to declare. Whatever you declare is what you're charged for. So if you don't declare, you basically don't pay. But when you go to the pump station, you cannot say, hey, that's 16%, me, I don't want to pay that one. You cannot negotiate your price. So it becomes a captive tax, and then it's applied across board, regardless of how much. So a person who wants 1,000 and somebody who wants 100,000 both buy tokens with the same charges at the same rate.
But that's not all. This tariff contains levies, 3 of them. The Energy and Petroleum Regulation Authority charge, or EPRA charge, the Water Resource Management Authority levy, or the WARMA levy, and the Rural Electrification Program levy, or the REP charge. The Rural Electrification Program levy is funneled into the implementation of the Rural Electrification Program, started by the government to ensure electricity connectivity in rural areas in Kenya.
If there is one component that has a big challenge in accounting for, is that particular one. Because it takes 5% of the energy cost. How much money is it? How much have we collected? What has it done? Nobody wants to explain to the consumer, yet it is the consumer who is trying to pay for that money.
The WARMA levy is determined by the amount of electricity supplied from hydroelectric power stations all over Kenya, such as the Kiambere Dam and Kindaruma Dam. It stands at 10 cents per kilowatt hour consumed. And lastly, the EPRA charge at 3 cents per unit. That goes to the energy regulator. A glaring observation that can be made is that fuel costs and taxes together constitute 47% of your electricity bill. While these prices remain unbearable for many, Kenya Power claims that its focus is on providing reliable electricity, not cheap electricity.
Sometimes it's better to have expensive power than no power. But I've asked myself, what is expensive? Sometimes it is more of our mindset than reality. If you look at what electricity does in people's lives and look at the value that it adds in our lives, we will not be very preoccupied with the cost.
Kwani wanadai ufunge biz na nayo yezi kuwa hivyo. Unakuta yenyewe pia inatu challenge tu kiasi. Sometimes wanatuletea bill iko chini na saa hiyo haki imekuwa juu hadi unashindwa ai. Yaani ni kama guesswork unashika.
Hiyo story naomba tu kama Gava inaweza shughulikia kidogo, at least mwananchi wa kawaida tu benefit kidogo juu imekuwa ngumu.
The big driver from where I sit has been the fact that government is trying to look for every source that has mass consumption to be able to raise. And that's why today we are paying more in taxes and charges for getting electricity tokens than the actual service product.
But as investments come in the long run, not in the immediate, in the long run, after these projects pay off, we are likely to have Kenyans benefiting from reduced tariffs. But in the short term, we have to continue, doing a lot of work to ensure that Kenyans get reliable supply. Our greatest focus is reliability and sustainability, but of course our highs are on reduced costs in the long run.
It is an entire infrastructure within the energy sector that then you can take back to the executive. You look at the ministry, the departments, the agencies, all involved. And I forgot to mention Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, which is EPRA, that sets the tariffs. They're also involved there. They have to know if you're buying, if an independent power producer is selling expensive electricity, of course the regulator will know that this has to be paid somehow. And so they're in collusion as well with the ministry to say, we agree, electricity has to be expensive. And we end up with penalties. If there's delayed transmission, we end up with penalties. So it is an entire network of murky, corrupt dealings that finally Wanjiko has to bear the brunt of. And we see that in terms of our electricity bills. And yet electricity is really the most basic requirement for a country to industrialize, for people to be able to conduct their businesses and live their lives with a level of dignity. So this is something that is a non-negotiable. We need electricity, but we can't afford electricity.
We will continue working to ensure that we Kenyans get quality supply and reliable supply. That's a priority, and to ensure that there is guarantee of power being there. That sustainability is very, very important at whatever cost. Sometimes it's better to have expensive power than no power.